This is a refi check for $94,700. Now, I know some of you have heard about the BRRRR strategy. I'm going to show you a strategy called 257 Cashflow for Life. That's BRRRR on steroids. That's going to be in this podcast. Let's get into it. So let's understand BRRRR versus 257 Cashflow for Life. So what is the difference? Well, number one, what is BRRRR? BRRRR means buy, rehab, rent, and repeat. That's basically the BRRRR strategy. And when I started doing real estate, I was not aware of the BRRRR strategy because, mind you, this was back in 2008, 9, 10, and 11. So I started flipping properties back in 2008 when everybody was running for the hills. And for the first 3 years, 2008, 9, and 10, I was just doing flips. I did about 100 or so flips in that time. And then I realized the real way to build wealth was not keep flipping, but was to hold properties for a long period of time. And at the time, you didn't have as many people, number one, on YouTube talking about real estate, and you just didn't have the social media at that particular time. So here I am investing in the Chicago suburbs and thinking about, I'm flipping all these properties, but how can I keep the properties? And because I didn't have a lot of cash to start with, what I had to do was I had to flip to earn an income to be able to live on and then take some of the profits and reinvest it. So if I kept a property as a rental, I could not afford to put 20, 25% out of my pocket. So is BRRRR a bad strategy? Actually, it's not. It's a great, the whole word BRRRR, which is a abbreviation for the buy, rehab, rent, and repeat. The basic strategy makes sense. The problem that I have with the strategy is this. So number one, why did it come into existence? So the reason it came into existence is not just for me. For hundreds of thousands of investors around the country, the issue was, can I buy a property? Can I rehab a property? Can I rent the property out? And how do I repeat that process? So let me give you an example. And I'm going to take even numbers just to keep it simple. So you buy a property for $100,000, you rehab it for $25,000, you're all in the property for $125,000, and you have about $10,000 to $15,000 other expenses. So you're all in the deal for $135,000 to $140,000, and then you go get it appraised. It appraises for, say, $210,000, $215,000. You refinance it, and then you rent the property out and do the process over again. So the basic strategy behind BRRRR, there is nothing wrong with it. But here's the big difference. The problem with BRRRR that I see, a lot of times what people will do is they'll go to poor areas of town, buy properties with poor quality tenants, and buy properties that barely cash flow. And then they'll call it a great investment. They'll say, oh my God, the property cash flows $50, $100, $150. Now, I understand if you're in a market like Dallas, you're in a market like Austin, you're in a market like some of the markets in California. It's tough to do the numbers that we do with 257. But let me first explain why I say 257 Cashflow for Life is a much better, is a much more superior, and it's BRRRR on steroids. So here's why I say that, and here's why I can say that with confidence. In the last about 12 years, I have worked personally with over 2,000 people, real estate investors, that started almost at zero. Most of them started at zero. And today that group of 2,000 people own over 28,000 rental properties. And 98% of those rental properties are single family properties. The rest of them are going to be 2-unit, 3-unit, 4 units, and some of them are going to be multifamilies. So here's why I say it's superior. The reason why it's superior is because with BRRRR, there are no underlying standards that BRRRR relies on. Meaning, as long as you can buy a property, as long as you can rehab it, as long as you can refinance it, get most, if not all, your money out and rent it out, it's considered a good quality property. For us, when you use the 257 Cashflow for Life, the basic premise behind that is this. In 2 years, you're going to buy 5 properties minimum and then set them up on a very heavy pay down, ideally in 7 years. Now, I understand from 2010 till 2024, in a lot of the markets, the property prices have 2.5 times, 3 times, almost 4 times in some of the markets, even some of the markets like we invest in Chicago market as well as Florida market. So I understand the realities of the market, but the numbers I'm giving you are realistic numbers, and they can be done in about 98% of the country. It's not going to be possible in every single market. And there are exceptions to that. So you take New York City, you take something like certain markets in California, you take certain markets in Texas, but this strategy is 100% doable. You just have to first understand it, and you truly have to buy properties at a discount. So what are the basic rules for 257? When do we say it's a home run deal? Not a good deal, not a great deal. What is a home run deal as far as 257? So it has to meet 3 criteria. Criteria number 1, that the property has to have equity after you rehab the property. Meaning, when you buy the property, when you rehab the property, when you take all your expenses, all in cost is that cost of all your purchase, rehab, and any other expenses put together. That's your all-in cost. Then you're going to get the property appraised. The appraisal needs to be a minimum of 25 to 30% higher. That's, to me, is a good quality property. Now, there's a caveat to that. You also have to consider, what kind of area am I buying? Am I buying an A area, which is an affluent aspirational area? Am I buying a B area, which is kind of just a little bit below the affluent or aspirational area? So in A area, which is an affluent area, may have good schools, may have a lot of shopping, maybe the nicer suburbs. Now understand, very high-end suburbs, right? Exclusive suburbs. This is not going to be possible because you're not going to be able to find rental properties in today's markets that the numbers make any sense and that meet all 3 of our rules. So when you talk about an A area, we're talking about a good area. We don't talk about kind of a boutique, really, really expensive real estate. We're talking about a good, solid area where most people would love to live, most people would love to send their kids to school. That's what we call an A. And if anything better than that, it's A+, kind of more of a boutique area. Next comes to it is your B area, which are areas not quite as nice as A. I like to call them kind of more like a bread and butter area. Now, right next to B is going to be a C area. What is a C area? And a lot of real estate investors are generally investing in a C and a D area. So what is a C? Well, C can be called an area which would be a little bit less economically well off than a B area. It's going to have maybe a little bit more crime. It's going to have maybe more tenants that you have Section 8, housing choice, voucher programs. Generally in those areas, they're going to be more. So it's not like it's really a crazy area where you can't go, but it certainly may have a lot more issues in terms of tenants' affordability, which is a C area, and then you have a D area, which is basically a disaster. My suggestion, if you're going to be owning rental properties, if you truly want to build a portfolio, do not invest in D areas. So number 1, the biggest difference is a lot of times people will just buy properties. They'll buy C- and D areas, accumulate a big portfolio, and say, oh my God, I have 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 rental properties, and you don't have a lot of properties, and they don't cash flow. Well, of course, because you're truly not investing. So let's first understand what is investing by our standards of 257 cash flow for life. Number 1, investing is buying a property at a deep discount. And not buying properties in poor areas, not buying properties in areas that nobody wants. If you go to an area which is a D area and you find, quote unquote, a great deal, there are 100 great deals to be had. So in that, to buy a poor area and call the property just because you bought it cheap a great deal, that's not investing. Guys, investing is, how do I pick something that is a blue chip stock, but I pick it up at a really good price. That's called investing. See, we're not about the number of properties we own. We're all about the quality of properties that you buy. You can buy less properties and have a lot greater cash flow. So that gets me to point number 2. First was you need to have equity in the property. Rule number 2 is the property has to have cash flow. So, well, what cash flow are we talking about? Now, the interest rates have been all over the place. When I started investing, we were doing commercial loans somewhere around 5.5% to 6%. Then the loans went up in the recent few years all the way up to almost 7.5% to 8%. Now, will that take a toll on your cash flow? 100%. Your taxes have gone up in a lot of the areas. The property price has gone up 2.5, 3 times in some of the areas that we invest in. So I understand your struggle that, Andrew, are you talking about something that's realistic? I'm telling you, this is 100% realistic, but you can't just buy properties at market prices. This will never work. So the cash flow that we look at is on a single family property. The cash flows we consider good is a minimum, even with the highest interest rates, is going to be 350. 450 to 500 is the average, what we consider a good cash flow for what fits for a 257 cash flow for life, right? 450 to 500. That's our perfect place. So number 1, 25% equity. Number 2, cash flow of minimum of about $400 net cash flow. So that's basically, and then the third criteria is going to be is your DCR. We don't consider DSCR, we consider DCR, your debt coverage ratio on a property, which is net operating income divided by principal plus interest. That needs to be in an ideal scenario, right? In an ideal scenario, by our standards, needs to be 1.33. That's what the number we want. We want 3 criteria. So for me to say, oh my God, I have a home run rental. Number 1, it'll have a minimum of 25 to 30% equity. Number 2, it'll have a cash flow of about 450 to about 550, 600. And number 3, it'll have a DCR ratio of 1.33. And the property will be A area, obviously beautiful, generally in a solid B area or a C plus area. That, to me, is a superior kind of property. Now, having said all of that, how do you really go about doing this? Well, number 1, what you have to understand is you have to understand what is the area you're buying in. That are you just running to cheap areas? So the other day, the reason I'm recording this is the other day I was talking to somebody that I would consider a friend of mine, and I would consider somebody that has been in real estate for a long time. And this particular person happens to invest in other markets, and they're buying a lot of out-of-town type of properties. And they're like, hey, listen, I'm like, how's your portfolio doing? He's like, well, not quite that well. We're only getting about 73, 74% collections. I'm like, listen, that doesn't make any sense. But he said, we have all our money out. I'm like, well, you have a pile of properties, 70, 80 properties, whatever it is. And you're really, if you have 70, 80% collections, you're really not considering how much money you're losing a month. In fact, you're probably barely breaking even, because guess what? You have less than 25%, you have more than 25% default rate, meaning your tenants aren't paying. And so what's happened as we record this? So I'm recording this in kind of towards the end, fourth quarter of 2024. Where's the economy before the elections? Well, economy is not doing quite as well. Who are the people that get affected when the economy is not doing quite well? Well, people who are in the C areas, of course, in the D areas. So if you load up on properties in C areas, any type of a default happens. Guess what? Who's going to first get affected? It's always the people that are in C and D areas. And this becomes really, really important to understand. See, a lot of times when people are doing a BRRRR strategy, they're basing it on how many properties do I have? Whereas when we do a 257 strategy, we base it on what is the equity in the property, what is the quality of the areas you're buying in, what is your net cash flow every single month, and then how much debt do you have? Now, I've heard from a lot of people that, Andrew, but why do you want properties that are paid down? See, I always like properties. My belief is this, that there's a concept which I believe in, which is called your LPN. Lifestyle property number. So to make the example very, very simple, let's just say every single month, you and your family spend about $10,000. That's what it costs you to live on. Now, I'm taking a high number. You're basically making, that means you're making 120,000 bucks, spending 120,000 bucks, approximately, right? And I'm not considering taxes in this case. So that means every month your burn rate of your spending for you and your family is about $10,000. And I have a very simple belief that if that is your burn rate, when you get into real estate, your first goal should be, how do I get to enough properties so that the amount of money that I spend every single month comes from cash flow and not from me working all the time? Again, let me repeat that all the amount of money that I need. So if your burn rate is, let's say, $5,000 a month, which is you're spending $60,000 a year, then how do I get to a point with enough rental properties so that that amount of cash flow comes in every single month? So I'm going to keep my job. That's number one. And then on the side, I'm going to build rental income, cash flow income, that in case something happens, I choose to quit my job, I choose to do something else, I want to go to real estate full time, how do I have enough money coming in? So the basic concept behind 257 Cash Flow for Life is, in 2 years, how am I going to buy 5 properties, have them all paid off in 7 years, and today, a little bit more realistically, in 10 to 12 years. Why? Because the property prices have gone up, taxes have gone up, interest rates have gone up, so the time gets extended. The idea behind that being is this, that if you have 5 properties, each property needs to cash flow somewhere around $400 to $500. The average person that we work with has an average cash flow of about $2,500 with 5 properties to anywhere from about $3,500 to $4,000. Now, for some people today, it may be even higher because they may have 2 properties that are Airbnbs. They may have 3 properties that are long-term rentals. We generally always promote that if you're going to have a long-term rental, do not do a year lease. You're going to do 2 to 3 year leases. That's another thing which is very different than most people who do BRRRR. People who do BRRRR every year, they want to basically increase rents every year. We don't believe in increasing rents every year, because what happens is if you sign to us, a year lease is a short-term lease. The reason is because if you're looking for tenants who are ideally going to live in your property for 2 or 3 years, what happens is our average tenant turnover is close to 5.2 to 5.6 years. We don't have tenant turnovers. So another difference with BRRRR versus how we look at real estate is we don't look at CapEx expenses at the time of on a monthly basis. A lot of times, if you look at a BRRRR strategy, people will build in CapEx expenses, which is your capital expenditure, right? That's your CapEx. Why? Whenever we're buying a property, we're doing a rehab on the front end, which is a rehab that your roof, your electrical, your plumbing, your HVAC systems, they're going to last. We do a 7-year rehab, meaning that most of your major systems should be lasting for the next 7 to 8 years. Well, why 7? See, generally, what you're going to find is that after 2 tenants, right? After 2 tenants, which you've held a property for 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, you're going to have to go back and do some sort of a light rehab. Well, the roof may be due. The HVAC maybe now is due for replacement. Now, if you replaced it 7, 8 years ago, as long as it's maintained, there's no reason to have to put a new HVAC system. But generally what we see is you're going to have to go do a touch-up. You're going to have to clean up. You're going to have to invest a little bit money back. But generally, whenever you rent out a property for 2 years at a time, what tends to happen is people are like, what, are you going to get tenants that are going to sign a lease for 2 years, Andrew? That doesn't sound realistic. Well, guess what? We've done over 28,000 properties, and not just my hundreds of properties. I'm talking about people just like you that always look for tenants that are looking for a 2 or 3 year lease. Now, mind you, each market is going to be a little bit different. So meaning in the Chicago suburbs market, we find a lot of tenants are willing to do a 2 or 3 year lease. It's not a problem. We happen to also invest in Florida, area called Punta Gorda, which is Port Charlotte, Charlotte County. In that area, there generally it's a little bit more transient. And so you're going to find a little bit less tenants that are willing to sign a 2 or 3 year lease. But most of the times, if that's what we're looking for, what happens is about 90% of times, 95% of times, you're going to attract tenants that are going to stay with you for a long, long period of time. And then you don't have to do rent increases every year. Do rent increases every 2 to 3 years. And generally, we don't tend to do large rent increases because why? The number one factor where landlords, where as a cash flow investor, you're going to make money is with turnover of tenants. The lower your turnover of tenants, the more money you're going to make in a property, because that is the secret. See, every time you do a turnover of tenant, you're going to have more of your CapEx expenses. Also, when a lot of people consider vacancies, they consider it based on, well, 5% for the year, 6%, maybe 10% for the year. Even though the lender may look at it from that perspective, you're not going to look at it from that perspective. The way you have to look at it, the way we look at it, if you truly follow the 257 formula, you're going to look at it how it actually happens in life. So generally, the way we account for vacancy is in 5 years, the property is going to be vacant for a period of 6 months. Now, the reality is, if you take a 5-year average, now we have an averages for the last 12 years with over 2,000 people that follow this exact formula, right? With 28,000 properties. What we have found is this, that even though we account for 6 months vacancy over a 5-year period. Why? Because when you have long-term tenants, generally they're going to move out 2.5, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, right? Our averages are somewhere around 5.2 is our average tenant lives in the property. Some longer, some, of course, a little bit less. But what we tend to find is the property is vacant for a month, month and a half, 2 months, and then it goes back. And now again, it performs for an extended period of time. See, the biggest difference between somebody who's just doing BRRRR versus somebody who's trying to meet the criteria for 257, they have a much higher bar. Just to buy a property, barely get $100 in cash flow or $50 in cash flow is not good enough for us. For me, if I look at a property and I have to put $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 out of pocket, I have some properties in really good areas where I have to put down $30,000, $40,000 after refinance because not all the money was refinanced, or I chose not to get all of the money refinanced. See, I don't consider that the best property, even though it may make a lot of money. I ideally want a property where I don't have a lot of money out of pocket. It still has a lot of equity, and there is a lot of cash flow that generated. Now, what is the idea behind the 257? The idea behind that is that the cash flow that comes from the 5 properties, and I'm only limiting it to 5 just because it's an easier concept to understand. Now, most people that we work with, they never stop at 5. They get to 5, then they're like, Andrew, maybe I should do one more 257. So they do 5 properties per LLC. Then they start another LLC, 5 properties, 5 properties, 5 properties, kind of pods of 257, 257, 257, and 257. That's how we always teach that, because the idea being is, remember, going back to what I talked about, which is the concept of LPN, lifestyle property number. So if it costs me $5,000 a month to live, how am I going to get to that number as quickly as possible and then have those properties paid down? I'm not saying you have to pay all of them off, but paid down. Why? Because guys, listen, retirement is not a function of age. Retirement is a function of cash flow. And I'll take it one step further. Retirement is not only a function of cash flow, retirement is the function of cash flow with predictability. Meaning, if I can retire, why do people prefer a pension? Well, they like a pension because pension comes in good market or bad, right? If you have a state pension, you have some sort of a federal pension, any of those things. What does a pension mean? That, hey, every single month you're going to get $3,000, whatever that number is. But you know, good economy, bad economy, I'm going to get my pension, I'm kind of set, right? Whether it's be a teacher's pension, any of those types of things. That's exactly how you have to think about real estate. That once you get to that point where you have not only cash flow, but you pay your properties down, now beyond that, once that criteria is met of your $6,000 a month or $10,000 a month, for some people it's going to be a higher number. So then you're going to generally need more properties. But my suggestion to you always is that take that number, start taking the cash flow from the first 5 properties, and what are you going to do? You're going to pick the one property that has the highest interest rate, and then you're going to look at which has the lowest mortgage. First, you're going to focus on interest rate, and then you're going to take the $2,500 that you get every single month and attack that mortgage. So you're going to attack it as hard as possibly can with the cash flow. So before you start paying down the mortgage, you're going to put 6 months of it aside. You're going to put 6 months of it aside, and then why do we put 6 months aside? Because we're building up a just-in-case fund. Your little kitty, your safety fund that you're going to build up, and then the rest of the money, you're going to start paying down every single month, every single month, every single month. You're going to start paying down one property. The idea being you're going to pay off that property. If it takes 2 years, 3 years is okay. Then you're going to take, now you don't have just $2,500. You've paid off property number 1. Now your cash flow will go up to maybe $3,000 a month because the amount that was going towards your payments no longer exists. Now you can take that number and attack property number 2, property number 3, property number 4. The goal being that the amount of money that you want to live on, that you need to live on, you want to get to that, and you want to have small to no debt on these properties. Guys, the way to bulletproof your cash flow is own properties that will meet, if not exceed, your personal living expenses. There's something I've said many, many, many times, and this is a basic principle of real estate. If you take care of real estate for the first 5 years, so let me repeat that. If you take care of real estate for the first 5 years, real estate will take care of you for the rest of your life. If you take care of real estate for the first 5 years, real estate will take care of you for the rest of your life. What do I mean? That it's like basically you kind of plant a fruit tree. You are going to have to take care of it for a little bit period of time. Then the tree will pretty much take care of itself. All you have to just make sure is nothing major is going wrong with it. It's exactly the same thing with cash flow properties, with rental properties, that once you set them up right, once you do all the foundational steps correctly, guess what happens? It pretty much self-sustains itself, and you don't have to put a lot of injection of capital from outside, and you just let it grow. Don't start living off of it. Start paying them down a little bit. And then what happens is one day will come when you don't have to keep running on the treadmill. Guys, what's a job? A job, it doesn't matter if you make $2,000 a month or you make $20,000 a month. It's a treadmill, meaning you have to show up for it to pay you money. And so that's just what a job is. And there's nothing wrong having a job. My always suggestion to people is keep your job. You want to be a multimillionaire? Keep your job and build the 257 formula. Use that on the side. Once you exceed your financial income that you need to live on by almost twice, 2 times. So if you're living on $5,000, you have $10,000 in income that's coming in from cash flow. At that time, you're going to start taking your kind of the accelerator off your job, and now you can switch to either full-time real estate, anything else you want to do. Why? Because now you are in a place where it's self-sustainable. You don't have to keep adding injections of cash. What do most real estate investors do? They quit their job and jump into real estate full-time too early. Right? Do not do that. See, there's nothing wrong with the basic idea of BRRRR, which is buying, rehabbing, renting, and repeating. But if you add the 257 strategies, which is I'm going to buy a property with equity, 25% minimum. I'm going to buy properties that cash flow, minimum of 350. And is it going to be hard to find properties at huge discounts? 100%, right? If you want to be a multimillionaire in the next 3-4 years, is that going to take some work? Is that going to take some effort? Is that going to take some frustration? 100%. Listen to our other podcasts where we have hundreds of investors just like you that started with nothing or that were doing flips or that had some properties. Now they've taken their business to an incredible level. So make sure you go listen to that. Listen to some of the other recordings that we have on finding properties off market. You have to go deep in terms of discounts. You have to go for properties that have deep, deep, deep discounts. And even in the best of the best markets, guess what? There are properties that come up. Is it going to require work? 100%. Are you going to have to do some effort finding that? 100%. But if you use the basic concept of BRRRR, which is buy, rehab, rent, and repeat, but you use the numbers that we talk about in 257 Cashflow for Life, which is properties with 25% equity, properties in decent areas with a minimum of $350, ideally $400 to $500 cash flow net every single month. So if you have a 2-unit, it needs to be somewhere around $750, $800 with a 2-unit. With a 3-unit, it needs to be somewhere around $1,000 to $1,100 for a 3-unit building. 4 units, so on and so forth. Now, you might say, Andrew, but it doesn't work the same way when you're buying a multi-unit. Multi-unit, you're buying based on kind of the numbers. You're buying it, maybe you're stabilizing it, maybe you're improving the management, and then you're selling the property stabilized in 5 years. Guys, that's a long-term flip. You're not in the investment business when you're doing a multi-unit long-term flip, right? It's basically you're buying the property, you're stabilizing it, you're selling it. Why would I ever want to sell a good quality asset? Unless the underlying criteria have changed, I don't want to sell it. I want to refinance it, right? Guys, selling is for poor people. Selling is for middle-class people. People who want to build wealth, people who truly want to have cash flow. They don't sell properties, they refinance them. That's the secret, and that's the biggest difference between just BRRRRing a property versus doing 257. Because 257 is not about the quantity of the properties. 257 is all based on the quality of the properties. I mean, we have hundreds of people that have 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 properties that have every single month $5,000, $7,000, $15,000, $20,000 plus net cash flow on properties and tremendous amount of equities. It's not just about buying properties for the sake of properties. And then the second thing is, if you truly want to retire with real estate, you got to start paying down a little bit of the debt. Why? Because that buys you ultimate freedom. You want to go on the road, you want to travel the world, guys, pay a price for the first 5 years. If you take care of real estate for the first 5 years, real estate will take care of you for the rest of your life. Having said that, please join us. Please share this message with a lot of your friends. If you want more info, if you want a calculator, which is your 257 calculator, and you want to analyze your properties, you want to know, is this a good property for 257? Make sure you reach out to us. Make sure you like, you share, subscribe. That's how you help us grow. You're listening to Andrew Holmes with Cashflow for Life. Talk to you soon.